That snaps for losers, man. I don't get involved in that stuff, but
Angel Rashad Milligan rolling out.
That's a good question.
Brandon,
We
you want one
can't,
quick question?
we can't ask Rashad questions.
Hey, Rashad.
And that. This is from Forbes.com. World War III? Question mark. According to Forbes TV and the Forbes staff, the Israel-Iran conflict is not the start of World War III. FDD's Mark Montgomery on Forbes Newsroom. Hold on, is this a? I'm thinking this a story. This a video. Come on, Forbes TV. This video is 17 minutes. Twin, I need something to read, bro. All right, hold on. We gonna find another story. I literally just clicked on it, and I clicked on it and things of that sort. Let me see. This is from the Mirror. The Mirror. Is there something from like mainstream media? Let me see. Should I go to Vox? My former employer? Let's go to Vox, I guess. Shout out to Vox. This is written by Zach Beku. All right, so shout out to Zach. Béchon. Zach Béchon. The Israel-Iran war hinges on three big things. It's impossible to know how the war will end, but here's how to make sense of it. Last night, Israel went to war with Iran, launching a bombing raid targeting Iran's senior military leadership and top nuclear scientists. The strikes were a tactical triumph for Israel. The heads of both Iran's entire military and the Revolutionary Guards were, unalived in the opening hours, and the Iranian air defenses took a massive hit. Israel suffered a few, if any, losses and suffered no immediate major retaliation. But on Friday afternoon, Iran launched a barrage of missiles across Israel that overwhelmed Israel's Iron Dome defenses. While the full scope of the counterattack is not clear yet, it underscores that in this war, as in any other, there's far too much, if you don't know, in the early days, to be confident about predicting how things end. Israeli officials are saying that the strikes will continue for days, if not weeks, essentially a commitment to open-ended regional war for the foreseeable future. It's nearly impossible at this stage to truly understand what's happening. We know from history the full impact of Israel's attack on Iran will take years to unfold. It could prevent an Iranian bomb or ensure one. It could destabilize the Iranian regime or entrench it, writes Kareem Sajapour, an expert on the Iran at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. There are, I think, at least three key questions that will play a major role in determining the outcome of this conflict. They are: 1. Is the Israeli objective limited to demolishing Iran's nuclear program, as they said, or is this a regime change operation? Number 2, to what extent does Iran have the capability to hit back? And number 3, how does this affect Iran's thinking about getting a nuclear bomb? All of these are, at this point, unanswerable, but trying to assess what we do know what can help clarify what to look for when trying to figure out the implications of the past day's events. What is Israel's objective? For the past several decades, Israel has described Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat to its survival. It was never fully clear if Iran was committed to getting a nuclear weapon or merely wanted the capability to acquire one quickly if it felt threatened. But the steps like the building and the centrifuges that could produce highly enriched uranium are identical up to the very last minute when it's arguably too late to stop by force. From an Israeli point of view, theocratic regime that sponsors terrorist groups that kills Israelis like Hamas and Hezbollah simply cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. For this reason, Israel has been threatening airstrikes on Iran's nuclear program for several decades. Last night, Israel made good on that threat. Israeli officials have described the attacks as prompted by imminent threat of the Iranian nuclear development with one such official telling BBC that it could have been built bombs within days, quote unquote. Israel's position is that Iran's nuclear development left them no choice in this matter, that it was facing the choice between striking now or staring down a nuclear armed Iran in the immediate future. We don't know how true these clones are, as we may never, but what we do know is some tension between the Israeli justification for the strikes and the actual targets they hit. Any efforts to cripple Iran's nuclear program would focus heavily on two targets: the nuclear enrichment facilities at the Natanz and Fordo. While Israel did target Iranian nuclear scientists, the physical facilities do not appear to have been taken out. Israel hit Natanz, but an early expert assessment suggests only limited damage, and there was no evidence, at least publicly, that Frodro was hit at the opening round at all. So, if it was true, the true target is the nuclear program, why did Israel expend so much effort targeting Iran's ballistic missile capabilities and military leadership while doing relatively little damage to nuclear infrastructure? There are, broadly speaking, two answers to this question. The first is that Israel plans to hit the nuclear facilities harder as the war goes on by unaliving is Iran's military leadership, including nearly its entire air command. Israel has weakened Iran's ability to defend its airspace and retaliate against the Israeli homeland. These first strikes on this theory were laying the groundwork for later strikes more focused on nuclear facilities. The entire operation, quote unquote, really has to be completed with the elimination of Fordo. Michael Leader, Israel's ambassador to the U.S., said in a Friday interview on Fox News. The second interpretation is that Israel has even bigger plans. It will heavily target the nuclear facilities to be sure, but it will also engage in a wider campaign to undermine the very foundations of the Iranian regime. By taking out the key leaders, Israel is weakening the Iran's government's ability to maintain its grip on power. The ultimate Israeli hope would be that these strikes have a similar effect in Iran as Israel's devastating strikes on Hezbollah did in Syria, damaging the government's ability to repress so severely that it creates space for domestic opponents to topple it. The targets that were hit made it clear that Israel's goal was broader than damaging Iran's nuclear program. Stephen Cook, a Middle East expert at the Council of Foreign Relations, Rights and Foreign Policies, the Israelis are clearly not satisfied with doing damage to Iran's nuclear program, but it seemed engaged in regime change. There is, in short, little doubt that Israel will heavily target the nuclear facilities in the coming days. That alone could produce significant bloodshed. But if Israel's ambitions are wider, nuclear demolition plus regime change, then we could be in for a much longer, deadlier, and riskier campaign. Can Iran fight back? For many years, the conventional wisdom among the Middle East analysts has always been that Israel will pay a very high price for striking Iran. Iran is a very large company, bigger in population than Germany, France, and Britain, and that is invested heavily in its military. It retains a large ballistic missile arsenal and as an extensive network of proxy militias around the Middle East, all of which have turned on Israel with deadly effect. Iran's Friday afternoon missile barrage suggests that it retains at least some of its capability to fight back, but how much? Since October 7, 2023, since the October 7, 2023 attacks, Israel has been systemically demolishing Iran's proxy network. The brutal war in Gaza has forced Hamas to basically go underground, fighting more like an insurgent group than a mini-state capable of firing off major rocket barrages at Israeli cities. A series of surprise attacks on Hezbollah's leadership in September of last year devastated the Lebanese group to the point where it had been forced to sit out the current round of fighting. And Israel has repeatedly struck Iranian interests around the Middle East, including a major assault on homeland air defenses in October 2024, while paying a relatively low price. An Iranian missile and drone attack targeting Israel in April of last year, launched in retaliation for an attack on its embassy in Damascus, did scarcely any damage. Once again, there are basically two interpretations of events. The first is that Iran is now a paper tiger, by destroying its proxies and exposing its retaliation capabilities by the vastly overstated. Israel has created a situation where it can attack Iran within relative impunity. The Iranians will certainly try and retaliate as they did on Friday, but it will be relatively weak, doing only limited damage to the Israeli targets. The second is that Iran has been holding back. While Iran may hate Israel, it is not, under this telling of events, seen as full blown war in all of its interests. For that reason, it has been reserving its most devastating weapons and those of its remaining allies, like the Houthis in Yemen and Iraqi militias, in order to avoid escalation. Now that escalation is clearly here, Iran can no longer restrain itself, and the long anticipated devastating response will happen in the coming days. Such an attack will go beyond Israeli military targets and hit the country's cities, attempt to shut down shipping through the critical Strait of Hormuz, and potentially even unalive American personnel in the region. Once again, we cannot yet be sure in which of these scenarios is much more likely. There is also a lot of space between the two extremes in which Iran retaliates forcefully against Israel, but not quite so aggressively against the U.S. and transport ships as pre-war estimates feared. But we can be certain that the scope of the conflict, including any risk that the U.S. might be dragged in, will be determined in the large part by whether Iran is truly weak or simply seem that way, excuse me. How does Iran think about the bomb after this? It is a technical matter, impossible to permanently prevent a country from building a nuclear bomb in a single attack. Whatever gets destroyed can eventually be rebuilt if the targeted government is truly committed to acquiring a weapon. This fact has been the centerpiece of the case against bombing Iran, an argument focusing less on whether Israel could damage Iranian infrastructure and whether doing so would accomplish anything in the long run. Israel cannot, by force alone, remove Iran's will to build a bomb. So even if Israel does serious damage to Natanz and Fordow, a real if, given Forjow's extensive fortifications, it cannot stop Iranians from repairing it without launching another strike in the future. Moreover, a successful Israeli attack would solidify Iran's interest in acquiring a nuclear deterrent, meaning that Iran would invest huge amounts of resources in a nuclear rebuild as soon as the bombs stop falling. On this logic, one Israeli strike commits Israel to forever war, bombing Iran at regular intervals to prevent it from reconstituting its program. Excuse me. We are now about to see the test of this argument, one with at least three outcomes. The first is that it's correct. Israel does real damage to Iran's nuclear facilities, but in the process, it convinces Iran that it needs to build a bomb in order to deter future Israeli aggression. This is what happened in Israel's 1981 strike on Iraq's nuclear facility in Azeraq, which caused Saddam Hussein's decision to double down on a nuclear development, a program only truly detained in the 1992 Gulf War and subsequent nuclear inspections. The second is that Israel is more effective than critics believes. Perhaps Israel does so much damage to Iran's nuclear facilities that the Iranians calculate the risk or reward of rebuilding them is simply too unfavorable. Or perhaps the regime change operation succeeds. The new Iranian government decides not to antagonize the world by recommitting a nuclear program. The third is that Iran's nuclear facilities suffer far less damage during the war than people anticipate, and Iran moves swiftly to build a bomb before Israel will be ready to stop them. This may sound implausible given Israel's successes so far, but expert assessments suggest that for the military weakness, it's possible for Iran, has done a better job shielding its weapons programs than it seems. "Quote unquote," Iran has already had a highly enriched uranium to build several nuclear weapons. This containized and believed to be stored at three different locations, and it is unclear whether Israel would be able to get it all off in the ongoing military strikes. Kim Polik, the vice president for the policy of the Middle East Institute, Rights and Foreign Affairs, Israeli and other Western intelligence services may have a very hard time finding new secretive Iranian nuclear sites. It may also have trouble destroying those sites, even if they're identified, since Iran will likely harden them beyond the level of its current facilities. How fast depends on the extent of the damage, but Fabian Hoffman, a fellow at the Center of European Policy Analysis think tank, suggests that it could, quote unquote, reach weapons grade enrichment levels relatively quickly, so as long as, quote unquote, anything substantial survives. Once again, we do not know which of these three scenarios is most likely, but the wide gulf in possibilities from Israel and then Iran's nuclear program to Iran developing a weapon in the immediate future suggests that any attempts to confidently predict what the past days events mean are extremely premature. So, is this World War III? We do not know. We don't know how this is going to end. That's what this long Vox story just said from Zach Beauchamp. Shout out to Zach Beauchamp once again. But according to
That's for losers, man. I don't get involved in that stuff, but
Rashad Milligan rolling out.
That's a good question.
We can't ask Rashad questions.
Hey, Rashad.